and we're very interested. Thank you. We need to record. We are very interested to hear what you have to say.
All right. Thank you for the introduction. And Meredith, thank you for the, I will say, the opening segue announcement. I'm going to more or less get right into it. I have a lot of information to cover, more or less compressing multiple years and multiple months of meetings into a short time period. With this, I'm going to speak quickly. I will try to enunciate as clearly as possible. My boom microphone wasn't working, so I'm using my computer peripherals here for this. And then I'm just gonna get right into it. I'm gonna share my screen here, and it will be a PowerPoint presentation. I'm gonna begin with a poor rhetorical technique. I am apologizing for my slides in advance. However, there is a reason for it. A lot of it is simply copy and paste information from SAW's presentations in order to, one, to show what we got directly from the rack, and also to have a source that I am using official information when I'm making my conclusions and whatnot. So with that being said, I'm gonna begin sharing my screen and we'll get started. Okay, so you should be seeing an intro. Okay, something's going crazy. All right.
Gee, that's the first time that's ever happened.
Okay, that's
No,
it.
I'm
We're now on slide 53. Does anyone have any questions? All right, we'll get back to that. All right.
Do you have a short quiz at the end of the period?
Exactly. Okay, on slide 42. Okay, this is.
Is
I
something
don't
laying on
know
your
what's
keyboard?
going on there. All right, and again, it stops at that slide. There's probably something content going on. Let's try this. All right, we'll work this way. It's a different format. It's got a clock in the upper corner. Okay, with the introduction, this is what we're talking about. That's me, District 9. I am now District 1, actually. This slide was produced in 2022 as a result of changes in the bylaws where they eliminated majority voting and went to a consensus-based system. So votes or decisions were not made. They were by vote of record of who is standing for what. But this was the revised decision-making process for 2022. I will tell you in advance, I am in note number 2. I am not blocking or obstructing decisions, and I am in consensus number 4. I do not fully agree, but I am willing to move forward. And I believe the presentation will support that as I go in. I'm going to start at the end with the recommendation and how the process ended and what you will likely hear in the media or in SAW's press releases or other conferences. And these are SAW's provided talking points or bullet points about the rate advisory committee and the rate study process. The first bullet is more or less a throwaway type bullet. It is a revenue neutral structure. We did not create revenue. We did not lose revenue between the consultant, the board, and the rate advisory committee. We moved the same amount of revenue around. That's all we did. The second bullet, I will disagree with a caveat. It will say each customer class pays the cost they impose. That is not correct. Each customer class will pay the cost that was allocated to them on the utility. They'll do a cost of service analysis, then they will do adjustments to that, and that is the cost they pay. And I'll talk more about that later on. The reasons I will support it come down here with the residential block. My primary advocacy on the committee was affordability for the residential class. And the rate structure that is being proposed will see reductions in water bills for the majority of residential customers. Some of those reductions will be sizable. They are spread across fixed and variable costs. The largest potential social benefit out of the new structure is a separate low income structure that is being produced. And these numbers here are real. There are 33 to 57% reductions in essential water use. So if you are a low income customer and you qualify for the programs, your bill is going down a lot. The general class, the bullet talking points are carefully selected. There were no changes to the general class. The lower fixed charges, which are a derivative of reducing residential charges, will provide some small benefit to low use customers, but there's really not that much water used in that area. The second bullet is, I'll get to that. It's not something that I really tend to agree with. The irrigation class, steep inclining blocks, yeah, above 160,000 gallons per month. So once you use an awful lot of water, your bill goes up, but you have to use an awful lot of water before you hit that incline. Recycled water, there is a sizable gap. Residents are continuing to subsidize successful businesses like Toyota and USAA in order to make the direct sales recycled water program viable for those customers. Rates are going up for the first time as a result of a rate advisory committee since the program started. So we are having 15%, 10%, 10%, 10% recycled water rate increases for the relatively small amount of water that is involved in the direct recycled sales program. So that is what will be presented, and that's more or less why I am where I'm at on the rate advisory committee recommendations. There are reductions, improvements in affordability for residents. The low income structure is good. The structure for business, I believe, could have been better, and I believe we could have done significantly better for conservation. So I am middle of the road on the whole thing. What is a rate restructure? To talk about it. Periodically, it occurs. The water industry uses the terms fair and equitable. I heard that expression so many times, it has ceased to have meaning to me. It is a buzzword that rates are set to be fair and equitable, fair and equitable. Going, well, I disagree. Texas Water Code requires that rates are just and reasonable, which is a different standard than fair and equitable. SAW's plans on doing this about every 5 years. It's been 7 years since they've done their last one. COVID got in the way. I believe they deliberately delayed a little bit for Vista Ridge. It is ostensibly done in it is done in a revenue neutral process, as I mentioned, and ostensibly done in accordance with industry standards. And an example of those industry standards is the AWA Manual M1 rates, fees, and charges. This is from Raf Tellis, the original consultant, and he described early on in the 2019 process what a rate study is supposed to do. Buzzwords: those who cause the cost pay the cost. I'll discuss that in detail later. Yes, it does talk about prices that cover utility costs. It could provide good documentation for rate study decision making, depending on the level of documentation that's there. Yes, it will provide defense against a legal challenge, which I thought was an interesting note to put, which I'll bring up again as well. The most important bullet on this slide, however, is that the utility and the local municipality that regulates that utility has broad latitude. They can choose to be as innovative or as bureaucratic or as uninnovative as they want to be. So if you hear things like, well, our hands are tied because cost of service says this, that's not entirely true, and that's not in accordance with industry guidance. You follow basic steps, but there is room to maneuver within those steps to shape your water rate structure to meet policy and goals. Okay. How is it done? Someone, not me, asked a really obvious question. Why is this a pyramid? I'm like, well, that's a great question, because it's not really a pyramid. It doesn't form a base and then build to a pinnacle. It's actually cyclical. It should be a loop where you compare your current objectives to your current structure. And if those two items match, why would you redesign it? So you should first assess effectiveness, really it's step one. And then if you have a mismatch between what you want to achieve with your rate structure and what you are achieving, then you change. You either change your goals or you change your structure, and then you execute the process. That is how I feel about it. It's cyclical, match goals to structure, and then change as needed in accordance with industry standards. This pyramid is going to be a marker as I step through my lots of slides to show you when we are transitioning from step one to step two through the rate process. I know I'm moving fast. You guys with me? Okay. Introduction to objectives. I'm going to go quick. This is a bureaucratic sample from AWA Manual M1 that was provided to us by Raftellus, that these are many of the common things that people look at. And if you look at these are a lot what our objectives look like. Probably because that's what the book says, make good objectives. So it's no real surprise. I will highlight that rate stability and revenue stability down here in the lower left corner are two separate kinds of objectives. They're separate in the book, and they're separate because they really address separate things. And I'm highlighting that for a reason. When you establish objectives, you may have competing objectives or conflicting objectives. If you are trying to build a structure that optimizes revenue stability, you are probably going to give up features that would drive conservation. This is Raftellus's example. This is not me cherry picking one, but you will see in a moment how that has impact. Revenue stability and conservation are generally not in alignment in a single structure. Okay, get some chat. Okay. All right. Once you establish your objectives, you attempt to build features into your rate structure that will help you attain those objectives. For example, in a revenue stability focused structure, you will have large fixed fees and smaller variable charges. In a cost of service, yep, question?
No.
Okay. In a cost of service based or focused oriented structure, you will attempt to rigidly adhere to the calculated costs of service. But if, for example, you want to emphasize affordability for a certain group, then you will take away some of that cost of service from some people and give it to someone else. So you may have all of these objectives, you might not achieve all of them. You simply have to prioritize what you want with your policy goals and standards. These were the 2015 structure objectives, and I'm going to highlight a couple of things. Financial sufficiencies, it's sort of a no-brainer gimme. It's like the company or the utility has to make enough money to pay for itself. So that's kind of a throwaway essential objective. In 2015, cost of service was essential, not important, essential. They combined revenue and rate stability, two separate objectives, into one essential objective. Conservation was ranked very highly. And I'm going to be honest, anything about objective number 4 never gets discussed. There is not enough time, there is not enough bandwidth in the room, enough data, enough trade-off to get to much past anything beyond 4 or 5. So although these things are classified as important or very important, they really don't get discussed. All right, 2019's objectives, we initially ranked affordability as number 1, conservation number 2. We had cost of service in there at number 4. That got changed by the board, who deleted that formerly essential objective, got removed by the board when we went, oh, here we go, revenue stability. And then drought is down here at number 8. These were reprioritized when we reconvened after the COVID hiatus. Conservation and rate stability swapped, drought and simplicity swapped, but in general, it was consistent. And these are very short definitions about what these objectives mean. And although these seem short, we spent an inordinate amount of time working on these objectives working on these definitions to match the objectives. Okay, so now I've just discussed what the older objectives are, what our current objectives are, and how we're going to assess SAW's performance in the 2015 structure, the current structure. How well did it do in meeting those objectives? It's interesting to note that it was either Doug Evanson or Mary Bailey addressing the SAW's board, and I forget who it was. They said to the board, we don't always assess our objectives, but we did this time. And we did because a very smart person, Jim Smile, pointed to the AWA manual and said, before we get started, the manual says we need to assess how we did on the current structure. So can we assess? And that was based on the committee asking the consultant to follow the structure, not the other way around. That was Jim. I like Jim. He is a very smart man. SAWs, I think they set us up for low expectations. It's hard to establish effectiveness. There's all these variables, but we'll go ahead and do it anyway. With SAWs, in my view, revenue stability really means predictability. And I'm going to say that for a couple reasons. To me, stable means it doesn't change very much. Well, from 2015 to 2018, there was a 40% increase in the company's revenue, from about 500 to about 700. So $200 million out of 500 is about a 40% increase in 4 years, 3 budget cycles, if you will. That's a big increase. What they mean by stability is, does their budgeted revenue match their actual revenue? And if it does, that's a stable structure in SAW's vernacular. I will also highlight what they told us in 2019, less volatility in rainy years. Okay, so revenue stability, they said revenue and rate, but revenue stability, good job. Rate stability, not so much. You will not see this chart or this information anywhere from SAWs. As a matter of fact, at no point during the 2019 or 2022 structures did they ever provide a comprehensive review of how the rates changed over time. They never said it. I did this work myself, and what you will see is from 2015 to 2020, when Vista Ridge kicked in, a mid-tier, mildly discretionary use customer had a 150% rate increase in a mid-tier use. Low-income users got rate increases. High-use users all got rate decreases initially. And this is what's described as, I'll say, squeezing the balloon. Because the balloon has to stay the same size. No matter what you do, the balloon has the same amount of air. If I squeeze the high end and reduce rates on the high end, and I squeeze the low end and reduce rates on the low end, then the rates have to go up in the middle. And that is exactly what happened. So rates went down on the high end, and they went up a lot in the middle. 1 year, 50% rate increase in mid-tier. So that was an overview of the rate stability that SAWs claimed they achieved in the 2015 structure.
Question, Joe.
Go ahead.
Joe, question. Can you go back to the previous slide?
Right there, yeah.
What is the x-axis represent? Is that usage in
the x-axis is selected blocks of the rate changes. So this is basically block 1, block 2. So I changed from where it used to be a 4-block structure to an 8-block structure, and they didn't divide uniquely. Up here, for example, all of this use that is this is block 7 and this is block 8 up here. All of this used to be block 4. Every single drop of water in the former highest revenue block was reduced as a part of the 2015 rate restructure. So these are simply places where the rate structure changed from 2015 to 2016. That's what those blocks are. That's the x-axis.
So essentially that is total water used.
No, it's the rate structure. By the time you get up here, yeah, the customer, you know, if your rates stop, if you only use this much water, your rates dropped, your bill went down. If you use this much water, your bill might have gone down a little. If you use this much, your bill went up, this much, your bill went up, this much, your bill went up a lot. And then when you eventually get to here, because of this sharp decrease at the 20,000 gallon point in the rate restructure, the conservation oriented rate restructure in 2015, your bill started going down. People who use the same amount of water in 2016 should have had lower actual bills than 2015. And there's a should for a reason in there because they also had a 10% rate increase in between. But the rate structure lowered bills for the highest use customers. Okay, I'm gonna move on with this.
Joe, just jargon, what is a block?
It's how much it. Okay, if you use water from 0 gallons to 2,992 gallons, and that's, it seems like a weird number, but there's a reason for it. You pay water at a certain rate, and then once you go above that amount of water, you pay at a higher rate. So this is a block that has water charged at a specific price per volume. And then this is a different price per volume. And then the next one is a different price per volume. So each of those volume changes is a block. Okay. SAWS is really different. And I don't make that up. And this is a chart from SAWS where if you look down here, 40% of SAWS bill on an average bill is made up from your fixed fees, not your volumetric fees, your fixed fees. The nearest closest utility in Texas is Dallas at 16.8. So that is a big differential. Your fixed charges, SAWS, 27 bucks. Expensive Austin only charged 17. So if most of your bill is fixed, your conservation incentive is reduced because if you can change your usage a fair amount, but your bill doesn't change. So there's a loss of linkage between consumption and money in SAW's current revenue stable structure. We're still assessing objectives. I'm going to have to accelerate a little bit here. SAW's claimed that more bills, and there's a reason because these slides are similar, more bills ended in lower rate blocks and fewer bills ended in higher rate blocks. That means more customers using less water and less customers are using more water. Small percent, but there was a clear movement in that direction. Usage is a slightly different value. More water as a percentage is being billed at the lower rates and less water is being used at the higher rates or billed at the higher rates. That generally means there is a shift in consumption where you have fewer customers using a lot of water. The other thing I'll highlight is there's less actual water sold to the residential class in 2018 than there was in 2015. Less water total, 500 million gallons less. SAW said this, the residential trend was decreasing. The general trend, however, was increasing. Residents were using less water, lower percentage, lower total, but they were paying more money, higher percentage of a higher total. So as a result of the 2015 rate restructure, residents picked up a higher percentage of the overall utilities cost of service intentionally, because the study said if we allocate 56% of the revenue to the residential class, that's how much money we need to get from them. It was an intentional move. It's not accidental. It's part of the plan. If you believe the cost of service study and you believe everything that was in there is correct, then that is a proper, correct outcome. Okay, so we are done with step one. We are on to step two. All right. Identifying revenue requirements and demand projections. This was given to us. We were told that the board approved 2020 test year budget is going to tell us how much water is used and how much revenue is going to be used. The RAC has no input to revenue requirements and demands. Same again for the 2022 budget. The RAC has no input in saying how much water is going to be used or how much money is necessary. It is provided by the board. I didn't think the 2020 budget made sense. Remember the brief trends. Residential use was decreasing. General use was increasing. So why this big jump in the blue line, which represents the residential class, and the orange line stayed flat? It did not, the budget that we were required to use did not match the trends that we had just been briefed. Another picture, same thing. Trend analysis, above the line for residential use in 2020, below the line for general use in 2020. 2022 is similar. Above the line for residential use, at or below the line for general use, and this is even including the crazy anomalous COVID spike and COVID dip in that curve. In addition to having more residential use in the budget, SAWS puts more expensive water and high use water in the budget. These are the same charts. This is bills, this is usage. More bills in the high block, more usage in the high block. These cause me concern because the budgets that are predictive do not match the trends that are historical and analytical. So I am not a fan of the budget. Okay, the budget also determines the rate revenue requirements. This is pretty a simple equation. The total revenue that the budget calls for minus non-rate revenue, impact fees, and other sources equals rate. It's pretty simple, basic arithmetic. So here's the numbers from the budget. SAWS is pushing almost $1 billion in their 2022 budget, $940 million. So if you think back to 2015, the budget was $500 million. Or 7 years ago, in 7 years, they went from a $500 million budget to an almost $1 billion budget. Even with growth, that is a big change. So these are our total revenue requirements. These are examples of a non-rate revenue requirement. These three numbers add up to $100.1 million. These are impact fees, and I'm highlighting them because you're going to see them in a minute. And I'm also highlighting the recycled rate system, the recycled water system money, because that also shows up in a different slide in the next picture. Total revenue, 940 from these three components, 343, 266, 319. So then we subtract out the non-rate revenue. Carollo also subtracted out the recycled water from the water supply, which is why 330 is not 343, like on the previous slide. So total revenue requirements with these exceptions, 330, subtract out impact fees, subtract out some other stuff. This is how much money, this is how much peanut butter we had to spread around, $260 million for water supply. Water delivery, same arithmetic, 266 minus impact fees, 230. Wastewater, same, 319 minus impact fees and other. That is how much we had to come up with. Here's my next question. Is the non-rate revenue forecast for the budget accurate? And what you'll notice is a strange anomaly. 2020, 2021, and 2022 all had exactly the same amount of impact fees. Despite phenomenal growth in SAWS staff's own words, and despite actual recoveries greatly exceeding that $100 million, they continued to budget $100 million. In 2020, it was $20 million over. When they were making the budget, 2021 was forecast at $40 million over. And they don't have an estimate, but 2022 is currently ahead of the pace for, again, significantly larger amounts of money in impact fees. In my view, if you properly budget for impact fees, that reduces the lowest cost of service because the developers are paying more in a test year budget year. They're paying accurately. So they're paying a larger portion. So when you do that arithmetic, when you subtract that number out, if I subtract a larger number out, the rate revenue decreases. I'm going to go quick through these next slides because this gets to impact fees. When they calculated the impact fees, they lowered water supply impact fees despite Vista Ridge. They changed their past practice of not charging the maximum, and the following things happened. Okay, Vista Ridge, it's expensive for ratepayers. That big green spike in those rate increases, that is all Vista Ridge. It is almost free for developers. There's numbers on here. Rates went up dramatically. Impact fees were decreased in the same year. Impact fees were decreased in this part of town. Over here, they were lower. The SAWS CEO, Robert Puente, briefed the council. Rates are going up overall. Well, no, they're not. They're not going up in these sprawl areas over here where I lost my mouse. They're not going up in these sprawl areas over here. And these are pictures of development in those areas. This to me looks like a canyon. You've got hardscape, you got runoff, it spits out this little drain down here. These pictures were taken from an Express News article about a dramatic growth on the west side of town. So I'm not a fan of Vista Ridge. Growth is not paying for growth, and I believe the budget shows that. More Vista Ridge slide. SAWS claims the pipeline is going to transfer at no additional cost. Although infrastructure payments to the budget are infrastructure payments for the pipeline are 60 million, which are recorded as a finance purchase. The water lease portion, which is much smaller, 40 million, is an operating expense. Doug Evanson, the Government Finance Officers Association, Doug Evanson will claim a conservative budget with those impact fees underestimates revenues so that you don't risk not getting enough revenue. I don't think he applies that consistently because, for example, if he really did that conservative budgeting, then he would also have applied it to those revenue, that water consumption block. Remember the slide where I showed more water being sold in those high revenue blocks in the 2022 budget? Well, this is the outcome of that. SAWS claimed in 2021, you have to read carefully, summertime rainfall, these are caveats, asterisks, etc. Volumetric revenue shortfall of 18.8 million. This was their example of why you could not charge higher blocks more money because, oh no, if it rains, we might not make the budget. And they blamed rainfall, a wet year on that. You look at the NOAA chart, the chart for 2021, and it is about as average a year as you could get here in Texas. Temperatures did not get hot. They didn't get above 100. I don't know at all. Rainfall was stable and regular throughout the year. SAWS quote unquote conservative budget could not match rainfall in an average year. So I am not a fan of the budget as a driver of demand, predictions, and revenue requirements. Someone commented to me, but SAWS budget wins awards, and that is true. SAWS presents their Distinguished Budget Presentation Award to the council and to the board every year. I think it's important that you know what is actually measured in this award. This is the disclaimer that's associated with their budget award. The GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association, does not assess the accuracy or adequacy of the information contained in the budget. The criteria for this award is, and I am not kidding, I am not making this up. Do you have a table of contents? Do you use captions in your graphics? If you meet that criteria, you have a budget that is presentation award. That is the award that SAWS is so proud of. So that's my comment on SAWS award-winning budget. We're on to step 3. How we doing? All right.
Fine.
Okay. Allocating costs. Let's go right into it. It is, I'm not gonna, everything so far may have seemed fairly complicated, and you are getting a little bit of a taste for what the RAC has to do. We get fire hosed with information coming fast and furious that we have to separate wheat from chaff. And then the cost of service comes in. It is a multi-step process. This is directly taken from the cost of service summary that you can get online right now. And they break it down. They take every single budget line. And yes, this is an eye chart, and this is one of multiple pages in that report. And it is every single cost that the utility has is assigned a category, is broken out of where that cost applies in the rate structure. The highlighted line down here is the single largest line in the overall study, the Vista Ridge Regional Supply Project, $100 million. That's not impact fee. That is for rate and rate making purposes, the operational costs of Vista Ridge. I believe 60 million of that 100 million goes to pay for the pipeline. 40 million pays for water. That 60 million is not paid for by developers. That's where I say Vista Ridge, expensive for ratepayers, almost free for developers. That is the best of my ability to ascertain Vista Ridge costs in this process. Once they allocate those costs, they move it to customer classes. We have 4 customer classes. Resident, actually that's not entirely true, which is again a SAWS issue. The recycled class is also a class, but which is also a water supply, but they're not shown on this chart because they handle recycled water differently. But they take that $260 million, remember that total rate revenue requirement, 260 from the budget, and then they slice those pieces of bread or the portions out to the individual customer classes. It's a complicated process. You do that for every category. Water supply. Okay, I did not replicate all the different ones. Okay, water supply. Then they determine the cost of service. So the cost of service in water supply, here you notice, and I'm going to jump back and forth between slides. Water supply, cost of service. Water supply rate revenue. Recycled does not appear. Recycled reappears, and the cost is different. It is a problem for me to follow SAWS presentations in this. They could have just as easily put a 0 value in here and kept it consistent. They do not do that. You have to pay attention from slide to slide. Water supply cost of service findings. So the cost to the residents is 150. The budgeted revenue is 149. So they say residents are underpaying by about $1 million. Recycled water cost is 9. They're only getting 3. They're underpaying by 6. Somebody has to pay that 6. So this is cost of service. This is the calculated cost of service. Almost immediately after and I'll highlight the irrigation class. Irrigation costs 16. They earn 31. Irrigation is overpaying their cost by almost $15 million. Calculated cost. Almost immediately after they determine cost, they do something called beneficial reallocation. They deal the cards, then they reshuffle the cards. So this is the calculated cost. This is the adjusted cost, and they move money around. So it costs residents 150. It costs recycled 9. Well, they don't want recycled to pay 9. They only want recycled to pay something less. So they add 3 million onto residents' rates, 3 million, or almost 4 million, 2.3 million, and that makes up the difference for recycled. So recycled's final adjusted cost of service is only 3. It costs 9, but they only have to pay 3 because residents are paying 3. Irrigation is paying part, but irrigation is overpaying by so much. They have so much money left over. We'll give some of that money to the general class and to the residential class and other classes. So my criticisms of cost of service of those who cause the cost, pay the cost. Well, if this column were true, that would be true, but that is not how it works out. These are policy and objective-driven changes that the utility makes. Who is going to pay what costs? So when SAWS says cost of service says you have to pay this, it's the adjusted cost of service. It is not the calculated cost of service. All right. There are different ways of doing it, and this gets wonkish and geeky. This is the actual text from the current report on why they chose the base method instead of the base, max day, and extra method, and they claim it's more affordable. There's an issue here with we currently use the base max day method because, according to Mary Bailey, somehow that change slipped under the radar in the last rate process and we didn't intend for it to occur. So they want to change it back. Except that the current method, according to my analysis and Jim Smiles' analysis, yields greater affordability for all classes. If you use this method of calculating the cost of service, everyone's bill, except irrigation, is lower. The total is the same. It simply reshuffles the cards based on a different calculation method. SAWS claimed in verbal presentations to us and in the minutes that, well, we need to change it back because we could be subject to legal challenge. And they said that, I counted the times Mary said it in the presentation to me, Mike Chaplin, and Jim Smile. No fewer than 6 times in a briefing, she said legal defensibility. If there's a legal challenge, we have to make this challenge for the law. Okay, you would think that would be very, very important. And I'm going to go backwards again, I'm sorry. This is the official text from the report. Legal defensibility is never mentioned to the board or to the council as a reason to change. If your documentation matches what you say, you could have a good rate structure. So, let's see. This is a review of the 2015 cost of service adjustment. In 2015, residents were increased cost of service 15%. Part of that 15% revenue increase, that means overall the residential customers got a 15% increase in the water supply portion. Part of that, 2.3 million, paid for recycled water. Recycled paid nothing extra. If the utility can recommend a 15% increase on residents and a 0% increase on Toyota, USAA, and golf courses, I am not sure how that is an equity-based structure. So this was 2015. The initial recommendation for 2020, for 2019 and 2022 was the same. So I have issues with how that beneficial reallocation works out. Cost of service summary, finishing this up. These are my bullets, and this bottom line bullet is probably one of the most important ones you can take. There's a standard process and industry practices, but the utility through beneficial reallocation and how you choose how to calculate it can still pick winners and losers in the rate structure. All right, more chat. Okay. I see questions on irrigation and saws recycled from Joan.
And Darby at the very beginning wanted to know who is in the irrigation class.
Businesses. Irrigation is primarily a general class. It's more or less a subset of the general class, although it is a separate class. There are almost no businesses. There are almost no residents who have irrigation meters. So it is almost all businesses, and it's classified as if they have a separate irrigation meter, they will pay with their irrigation meter. And if they don't have an irrigation meter, there will be a percentage of their bill that is assumed to be irrigation. So almost all businesses are irrigation.
Does that include farmers? I thought that's what irrigation meant.
I would agree. That's what it should sound like. That's what I thought initially, but it is not. Unless a farmer has a direct contract to irrigate his fields, I don't believe that it is primarily a farm product. That was not presented as such to us in the RAC. When we were talking about irrigation, Mary Bailey talked about most of irrigation, our business customers, and she did not say farmers or irrigators, it was, or agriculture, it was business. Like people who have extensive landscaping outside.
I'm sorry.
Okay, a couple other questions. Why SAWS wants, well, I'll say a couple things and I'll correct Joan. SAWS doesn't subsidize residents and the business. Other people, other customers do so. Hypothetically, if recycled water really did offset significant amounts of potable water use and saved on expensive projects like Vista Ridge or the desalination plants, I would agree that the subsidy would be a good thing. But the direct sales recycled program is less than 3% of recycled and getting smaller. I'm sorry, less than 3% of potable and getting smaller. It is a small amount of water that goes to direct sales. And I'm parsing my words carefully because recycled water is also the primary source of water that flows into the Riverwalk. Recycled water is the water that is used in SAW's chilled water program, where they sell chilled water to cool air-conditioned businesses, hotels, things on Port San Antonio. There could be social and beneficial policies or practices for subsidizing recycled if it really did offset a sizable amount of potable. At less than 3%, I don't see the economic benefit, and at a 66% subsidy, I think it's excessive. So those are my arguments or observations about recycled water.
Diane?
That is Joan's comment about sewerage. That's correct. They do not pay sewer based on the amount of water that they use, that they purchase for irrigation, because it doesn't go in the sewer. I'll get to recycled allocation. Yes, Alan, I'll say a little bit. It's the thumb of the chamber. It's different people's thumbs on the scale. You could say it's to enact policy, but I have questions about it because we had no input. The committee that sets objectives had almost no input into the beneficial reallocation on how that was done. I felt unempowered in that process. All right. Rate design.
We have one person whose question was not answered. Why did the consultant change from Raftelis to Carollo?
Raftelis to Carollo. The period of performance of Raftelis's contract only went through early 2020. They were still in the COVID hiatus when the period of performance of the contract ended. SAWS put out an RFP. They had at least 3 different responses. I want to say Raptelis, Carollo, and Black and Veatch. I think were at least 3 known respondents to the board's RFP. Carollo had just completed a rate study in Houston that finished in 2021. So the board chose Carollo in lieu of Raptelis in a new contract competition. I have no insight into the decision-making process, but that is the official reason why the consultants changed. All right. Rate design. I am trying to go quick and wrap some of this up.
Yeah, we won't ask any more questions until the end.
Okay. The residential class had 5 different options presented. They were all pretty much based on the original initial structure. General class had no changes in structure. Irrigation also had no real changes in structure. Wholesale was literally thrown in at the very last moment to make one minor change, but again, wholesale had almost no changes, and recycled to me is a can of worms, which might end up being a topic for a different day based on time. But residential had the most discussion, partly because it's the most obvious one. That's what the council votes on, what their residents are paying. So it had the most visibility and got the most attention. One of the big aspects of rate setting is something called bill frequency analysis. And that can be summed up as who uses how much water at what rate. Once you have your bill frequency analysis, you can break out how much volumetric revenue you get by gallons sold, by dollars per gallon sold, plus the fixed revenue in number of bills times the fee gives you that revenue, and you sum that up. The other aspect you're looking at in rate design is what message are you communicating to your ratepayers through their bill? If they use a lot of water, does their bill go up sharply? Does their bill not go up? Once you hit a certain point, does it go up faster? Sort of like driving mileage in your car, right? If you stay below 65, your mileage is pretty good, pretty reasonable. Once you start really speeding up, your gas mileage drops. So that's about the best analogy I can come up with a price signal. If you have a high rate increase on high use, that bill should go up the most. All right. This is taken from Carollo's rate study for Houston, and I'm going to highlight this sentence here. This analysis drives the allocation of costs to improve equity for customers. So I'm highlighting Carollo's study because then Carollo for Houston presented this nice graphic about bill frequency analysis for all of their different customers in their study. They didn't do that for us. I asked for this data on March 29th. I finally got it May 13th, basically 2 meetings later on a Friday when the meeting was on Tuesday to make decisions about the general class. So I am not really happy with how responsive SAWS was. I'm going to highlight a couple things on this chart. It's from Houston, but the usage characteristics are very similar to San Antonio. One, the chart stops at 50,000 gallons. The solid E line or the long dashed line are bills. The dotted lines are usage. So bills and usage percentage-wise generally parallel each other for the residential class. Almost 100% of bills are less than 50,000 gallons. Almost 100% of water is billed at rates less than 50,000 gallons. For businesses, most of your bills are pretty low, 80% less than 50,000 gallons. Your usage, however, is heavily concentrated in the high use blocks. 25% of your use is below 50. 75% is used above that. So your usage characteristics between your classes is dramatically different. Businesses and relatively few businesses, 20% or less, use the vast majority of residential water. So that's for Houston. Carollo and SAWS did not provide us this comprehensive overview for San Antonio. I can do it myself. I have done it myself, but I get tired of doing it myself. This is a common depiction of a rate block. So Joan, each of these are blocks. Your block 1 is this water that's below 2992. 2992 is standby. Somebody's at my door. Yeah. Oh, hi, thank you. Okay. Oh, okay, thank you. That was housekeeping, giving me towels. I think they went to the wrong room though. 'Cause I have my towels. All right. So these are rate blocks. SAWS will claim that this sharp increase of 6.5 factor is a price signal. I will say it's a rate signal because before you get to that price, you have to go through all these blocks first. Okay. This chart, again, you saw this, but bill frequency analysis, more water, low rates, less water at peak rates. Same thing, you've seen this before. Most customers are low use, they really are. Few customers, 3% of customers are high use customers. These rates are stable over time. I'm gonna highlight something weird about this chart. This is again with SAWS. It goes backwards. This is the most recent data, and this is the least recent data. So this is 2022, and this is 2016, which threw me for a bit. And like, don't you add like time left to right? You have to pay attention when you're looking at SAWS charts. But customer behavior in San Antonio is pretty stable. Rate increases, rainfall, it doesn't matter all that much. Customers use about what customers use. However, this 3% of customers down here, your bill frequency analysis, they use a lot of water. They use 15% of water. That top 3%, 15% total. That bottom 30%, the low use customers, they don't use much water. And this is sort of a simple truism. Customers who use less water, use less water. It seems obvious, but that kind of got lost in the message. So we had to present, this is my analysis, this is that same thing graphically. Where it said 5.6%, around 6% of water is billed at block 8 rates. Well, that's true. But those block 8 customers first have to buy block 1, block 2, block 3, all the way up before they use that water. So 3% of customers use 15% of water, 30%, 8%. So the rate structure was like, how do we have these guys pay less, these guys pay more, because these guys drive up costs. That was a rate structure consideration. It got narrowed down to 3 options. These are generic summaries of those options. These are table-based comparisons. And I include these for 1 or 2 reasons. That these look like sizable decreases. But if you go back and think about 2015, that's about the increase that customers saw in 1 year. So it's not crazy amounts of money. It's not an unheard of change in the rate structure. Option 4 and 5 did not give those same levels of reductions. I'm going to highlight this 12%. That's for 0 use. As soon as you start using water, that rate dropped off from option 2. Option 4 and 5, significant increases in higher rates in option 2, much less in option 4, which was advocated by SAWS. Option 5, which is a compromise sort of position, higher rate increases for the extremely high use, lower for SAWS, and sort of moderate for option 5. Again, you saw this before, right? So SAWS didn't want to increase these high rates. Well, it's like you dropped them pretty significantly. So it's not like raising them would be that huge a change from your historic basis, but SAWS did not want to do so. This part is something that really aggravated me. I wasn't here when this meeting occurred. I was on the road in Nevada. They did a comparison, and they used the term, or they used this description: inclining block structures become unsustainable when you take these actions. They said the current rate structure, the current structure. They showed this graphic, and it's perfectly reasonable. It's what happens when you raise all of the rates at the same amount. You have a slight increase over a 3-year period, and that 3-year period was up to 2025. So they presented this analysis, option 2 only. Then they applied some things that never, ever happen. SAWS never raises rates at a differential rate. The highest block rate, what if we raised them 25% and we didn't raise somebody else much at all? We only raised these guys 4%. Well, the bill impact would go crazy and the rate structure would go crazy. We'd have this crazy differential and the rate structure would become unsustainable. It's like in only 3 years, and only for option 2, because that's the only option they presented. Well, I wasn't there in the room, but I will again give praise to Jim Smile. He asked a question. Just, hold on. 50% of water is consumed by these people. How does that become unsustainable? The response from SAWS is, well, you're not correct, Mr. Smile. The top 20% uses 23%. The RAC chair asked the consultant to clarify what she was saying. Consultant reiterated, no, the information we provided you earlier was probably incorrect. The top 20% uses 23%, and the structures can be unsustainable. Then consensus was achieved. Then they reviewed the data, and lo and behold, Jim was correct. And we knew he was correct. And they discussed this later on, but it wasn't deemed sufficient enough to revisit the structure. And it bothers me because if you provide an unrealistic analysis for only one option that is not preferred by the utility, and then you mistakenly, and I believe it was a genuine mistake by the consultant's part, then you mistakenly present additional information. I'm not really sure that's a great endorsement for a good decision that has been made. So residential structure, they chose option 5, which isn't awful, but it was not as beneficial as option 2. Wastewater, we were only presented one option. Lo and behold, we chose that option. It is a bill impact because the cost of service study said residents were paying too little, or I'm sorry, they were paying too much. So they got a bill reduction because cost of service said they would get a bill reduction. This graphic, again, I'll give credit for Jim. Jim's like, so what criteria did you use to put a green check mark or a red X in the block? And they go, well, we didn't really have hard and fast criteria. We evaluated against the current structure, and this was our best assessment. Can you guess which one they were advocating? And can you guess which one they didn't like? This is the one that was chosen, option 5. Yeah. All right. And option 1, of course, was chosen because it was the only option that was presented. So we chose it, and nothing for drought. Shortly after this, then they brought up another question that average winter consumption uses your winter average. Well, people have complained that they don't ever get their winter average in some months. They go away, they're not there. They're like Alan down somewhere out of town for the summer, but they're still paying for full use. SAWS admits 25 to 30% of bills are less. If they went to a more accurate use, where if you cut back on your use, your sewer bill also dropped, they would have to raise rates. So they made the recommendation of continuing AWC regardless of actual water usage, which I disagree with on a cost of service basis. I also disagree with on a conservation basis, because if I cut my bill and my sewer bill does not drop, that diminishes the water reduction incentive that you have. So for conservation reasons, for fairness reasons, I don't like this decision either. I wasn't in the meeting, I'm sorry. The affordability program. This slide is different, and it's something else Solace did, and I don't understand it. Whenever they discussed affordability, they changed their slide format, and it made it really difficult to follow the information that they were presented. Instead of blocks, we had tiers. The graphics were different. The colors were different. It's like I am having a difficult time. I consider myself a smart guy. I've got an ego. Like I am having a tough time following this structure in my options. So what we eventually got to, option B was recommended. These are the tiers. You'll notice that if you're a really low income user, you have no fixed charge. If you're above 2,000 gallons, which isn't much, it's only $3. It's currently a lot more. This chart is hard to interpret. We went to option B. There is a cost associated with option B, which I'll get to in a moment. This is a better graphic. If you are a low use customer, you are going to see a sizable percentage reduction in your bill. So this is a good thing for the affordability customers. So this is something that more or less, FPL stands for federal poverty level. This is something that more or less everybody can endorse. There is a cost, however, which I'll mention in just a moment. This is a comparison. Residential bills, about a $5 decrease on average. Not huge. All of that hue and cry and everything else from about $65 inside city limits to about $60. Outside city limits, 70 to about 70. Average bill, about that much, $5 reduction. Not a huge amount, but reasonable. The affordability program, again, a tough graphic to read. Slightly higher water use, which is why these numbers are different. But again, residential bill, about $60, about $60. If they didn't have the discount, it's really going to be $22 until you add the city fee, $27. So instead of paying 60, 27, 27, 27, 27, we decided to not make it all complicated on, oh, and I apologize if this is offensive, but oh, you're slightly poor, you get $27. Oh, you're really poor. It's like, no, if you're in the affordability program, you get the break, and it's the same bill throughout the program. So the affordability program is, I think, a good win for this rate structure. Different blocks. I'll say badly formatted slide because I don't know what 4 is. Oh, you mean 4,000 gallons. That would be helpful if you provided units and provided volumes and you provided numbers on your chart to help me understand what your chart is, but you're not very good at it. This is the cost for the affordability program. It's 0.159 or 16 cents per 1,000 gallons, regardless of how much is used. So it's not 16 cents, it's 16 cents per 1,000 gallons that is added to customers' bills to pay for the affordability program, not unlike the STEP program fees with CPS. So there are additional fees associated with that. General class design, no changes. Fixed charges reduced. Volumetric charges based on cost of service, but no changes. The general class is a different animal. Notice these are percentage, they're not volumes. General class customers do not pay rates based on how much water they use. They pay rates based on their deviation from an average consumption over the year. If I average 150,000 gallons a month and I never go over 150,000 gallons a month, I pay the lowest rate. If I average 10,000 gallons a month, I pay the lowest rate. It is based on your deviation from average. You will also notice that if you were paid, I'll jump back real quick, the range of rates from the lowest to the highest is $3 to $5.30. General class, $3 to $5. General class goes up, or I'm sorry, residential class. Residential class goes up a lot higher, faster. That's to have a conservation incentive, is what we were told. Low conservation incentive in the general class based on historic use. I'm going to skip this because it's data. Basically, this is numbers that 98% bills 20% of bill, 20% of water cumulative usage is used by the top 1% of customers. So this is your data that supports that bill frequency analysis. Bill impacts, look at your jumps, 1,000 gallons. The lowest third of residential customers average about 1,000 gallons. The highest third average 200,000 gallons. That's your distribution. Lots of low use customers, few high use customers that use an awful lot of water. That's your general class distribution. This chart of the impacts, this is where it was, this is where it is. Almost no change for the general class going up. If they had the usage curve, this is the bill curve, the blue curve. If they had the usage curve, it would be down here because you have to go way out beyond 50,000 to actually account for how much water is used by the general class. The irrigation class, paradoxically, although it is a business cost, reverts back to volume. So volumetric rates, couple low blocks. You remember that bullet about the sharply increasing tier? I'm not sure where that tier increases sharply because it jumps from 18,000 gallons. The next block is 160,000 gallons. So that's a really big rate block that covers an awful lot of use. I'll highlight that everybody, businesses included as residents, are getting that affordability charge. So it's not residents paying for residents, it's everybody paying for the low affordability residential program. Irrigation bill impact, almost no change. Recycled water, and I'll get into this, I'll cover it quickly. It's a sore point with me, I don't like it. We are raising the rates 15%, 10%, 10%. They're currently at a 30% cost recovery or 66% subsidy. Next year, if they adopt the rates, it's going to 48, and 5 years later, it'll finally be to 71%. The rates are really low. Remember, $3, $5? Well, these are residential rates. So that is how much difference the recycled water is costing. And here it's a convenient point for me to tell you those weird numbers, 2992, 59 or 5496, whatever it is, that is a multiple of 748. 748 is the number of gallons in a 100 cubic foot increment. The current rate structure is based on hundreds of cubic feet, which is why you have weird numbers. You could say 100 cubic feet or 200 cubic feet, and those would be nice round numbers. Instead, they go, oh no, 100 cubic feet is 748 gallons, 4 cubic feet is 299.2. So that is why they have those weird numbers. There is logic to it. They're getting rid of it with automated meter infrastructure, and they're going to gallons and 1,000 gallons instead of cubic feet. I could deal with either. I believe anybody could deal with either if you didn't have weird conversions and just went forward. Recycled water, again, look at the difference in scale from your low use customers to your high use customers, and look at the vast quantity of customers, all 81 of them. There are only 81 direct sales customers in the city of San Antonio. This is a new wrinkle. The city of San Antonio is now paying for their recycled water at an extremely low rate, pumping this is for flows into the San Antonio River primarily. And this is new. This got thrown in like mid-meeting, meeting number 6 that we didn't anticipate. This is why recycle is a sore point with me. There was a requirement in 2015 report to do a study. In order to meet this objective, do a study in the next 12 months. No study was done. SAWS never did it. They didn't meet the requirement. We didn't have good data. Until that data is done, make sure the rates don't deteriorate. The rates deteriorated. SAWS claimed it was a 19% rate increase in 2020. It's really a 30.6% rate increase in 2020. Me and Mary Bailey disagreed in the meeting. You can do the math. It's 30%. It's not 19%. You can look at the PUC filing. You can follow how SAWS changes language in the study. It's average, weighted average, weighted average, weighted average. Oh no, we mean bill impact. Oh no, weighted average bill impact. It's like, pick a method, stick with it. Your report says weighted average, do weighted average 30%. Recycled water, customers, it was paid for by credits on their bill. They didn't pay impact fees. The amount is small and decreasing. It was 5% in 2017, it's 3% now. They don't want to extend it. The Municipal Utilities Committee asked about extending the recycled water supply. SAWD said, we don't want to run recycled water over the Edwards Aquifer, so the extended growth areas to the north. We don't want to run it there, so we don't anticipate expanding this program. These were official surveys that SAWS curiously didn't make available to the RAC, but I found it online because Jim Smile mentioned it, because Jim Smile's a smart guy and knows stuff. Wrap up. I'm in this block, residential affordability, low income affordability. I'm not going to fight and argue with it, even though I believe it could have been better for conservation. I could have been better for affordability. This is why going forward, talking Meredith's plan, the water management plans in business. This is a slide SAWS showed us. 49% decrease, 25 years. No, not true. Good data. 20% decrease at best. C, this is my work. This is the Texas A&M scientific review panel's work. Not 50% in 25 years. Drought management has not been seriously addressed for a while. It wasn't in our structure. It wasn't the 2015 structure. SAWS says deal with drought management in the water management plan. So if you're concerned about drought, SAWS says water management plan. Surcharges do not kick in until stage 4. SAWS doesn't even want to go to stage 3, let alone stage 4. So how hard are you going to have to get a drought surcharge to have a financial impact for customer behavior? Yeah, I was one of these guys who said, why don't we have a drought surcharge? Dr. Alfred Montoya, Jim Smile, Dr. Christine Drennan, we were all talking about, why can't we have a drought surcharge? Why can't we reduce the politics and have this? And like, water management plan, council policy, not in the rate structure. If you saw Greg Harmon's article about the Rocky Mountain Institute critique on SAWS, misleading communication, rate impact, bottom line, building, it undercuts fundamental elements of a resource plan. If you do not give me good information and communicate with me effectively, and I'm on your rate making committee, I am not really going to trust you as a utility. That is my presentation. I will address the comments in the charts. Let's see.
Oh, whoa, okay.
Yeah, I'm looking. There's a whole lot of
away.
questions up in the charts or in the comments.
Yeah.
Okay. Joan's question about expanding recycling to reduce irrigation. I believe it could be. Bernie, for example,